just to start, could you give me an indication how many of you work with mothers and children? Okay, so we have, I'm talking to an audience who's doing the work, and so it will be of interest to you. What I'd like to okay, here we go.
It's in the computer. It's in the computer.
The key for the...
That's okay, I can manually do it.
It takes 3 professors to fix this.
Okay, so other than my than the people I work with in South Africa, in the squatter camps of South Africa, who were my teachers, I would say that a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is a tribute to Mary and Peter, because I would say that we have been spending the last 20 years testing various of their theories, the theories that they sat on the couch writing together, and our work has been to see whether we can find empirical paradigms to test their theories about the development of mentalization. So with this little motley crew, these are my partners in crime in Quebec, my colleague Lina Nordmann and some of our students who have contributed to the work that I'll be presenting today. So our work is clinical research. We learn from patients and we learn from them and try and help them and do research in the process. So we've been working with sort of really rolling out the red carpet from where Daniel, continuing to roll out that carpet of reflective function and infant attachment with both abused and non-abused samples. And working with sexually abused children to see how their mentalization develops, and looking at their play and the development of reflective function over time, as well as how children feel about their embodied selves, how that relates to reflective function, and how they feel about themselves when they look at themselves in the mirror. And how maternal reflective function is related to child reflective function. So we also want to see whether mothers who talk the talk can also walk the walk. And we do that by using the squiggle, Winnicott's squiggle, and seeing whether the mother's reflective function is related to what she's actually able to read into the child's squiggle, because we think this is a paradigm for what mothers do and how they help to children to crystallize something individual about themselves. And then mentalizing and play therapy, and whether we can teach future clinicians to mentalize more our students. So today I'd like to be addressing some key questions, because I'd like to see whether there's some empirical test of the mentalization model and how it develops, and whether mentalizing actually matters. We all assume that it matters, that's why it's here, we here. But does it matter for little kids? Can we show that is their relation with psychopathology. Because I think down the line in adulthood, things become too dirty and messy. You can no longer untangle all the different lines. But in childhood, it's still very, very clear. You can see it. And what are the implications of maternal RF? And what happens in the context of abuse? Because if we can show that RF matters in the context of abuse, this is really a very stringent test of the relevance of RF. Now, if you don't know this, I've come to the wrong conference. But what I would like to add here is that mentalization, I think, would want to be in a sweet spot of mentalization. Not too little and not too much, not too confused, but also not over certain that I know what you're thinking. And good mentalization, if you're a parent, also knows when to stop and have fun. So if we think of the brilliance of what Peter and Mary did in the early 90s, is that they brought together really 4 lines of theory and research. That of attachment and early mother-infant communication, theory of mind, that at 4 years of age, children are able to pass a false belief test. And then child emotional understanding, social cognition, and social information processing. But also the psychoanalytic writing of Bion, Winnicott, Marty, and Mahler. And in the last 10 years, there's been an exciting proliferation of research on mentalizing and social cognition, the neurobiology of it, even the genetics, the phenotypes associated with different types of deficits in mentalizing. And for us researchers, this is fascinating. But what is the relevance of clinicians, for clinicians, as many of you are? It's good that this is happening because it strengthens our empirical base, and it means that the therapies that we provide will have a very, very good empirical base. It bodes well for the future of this model. But I think, for me, it is clear that mentalization is not the same as social cognition. It's a type of social cognition that is more nuanced. It's social cognition pushed to its limits because it's really in the context of the family, in close relationships with partners, but especially when we take care of young children, infants and young children. It's there where the rubber hits the road. This is where it really has an impact. There can be no better empirical paradigm than putting a baby in the equation and seeing whether parents are able to maintain the mentalization. So a lot of our work has been on the importance of the parent's mentalizing stance. And this is really at the root of secure, and I would say organized attachment, because many people don't get as far as secure attachment. It is about, you can go and explore, I'm here if you need me. And this you can see is the basis of epistemic trust. You can have trust in it's the mother signaling to the child that in this environment you can go and do your thing, but if you need help, people will be there to respond, to bail you out. So it's really in the parent's benign interest in the child's mind that the child develops that where social cognition gets applied to the individual, where the child is able to develop, to apply social cognition in an individualized individualized way. And the capacity of the parent to read the child's squiggle and co-construct a meaning. And this is where we have the emergence of child RF. Now, how does this look in terms of a model where we looked at reflective function that Dr. Schechter explained? This is reflective function on the AAI, because we think this is a more stringent test than to look at reflective function about the child should predict. But if I look at reflective function before the birth of the baby, about the parents' past relationships with their parents, does it predict sensitivity and attachment, organization, and security? So this is Peter Mary's theory, that they said parental reflective function would underlie sensitive caregiving. And what do we see? We see that there is a correlation with sensitivity, but when we put insensitivity into the equation, that is really what we are getting, that reflective function helps the mother to inhibit insensitive behavior. And it's through that, when we put both in the model simultaneously, that we see that is really where the action is, and it predicts both the organization and security of attachment. And we control for education. We control for SES, for socioeconomic status, and the model is robust. And the little boys, we control for the sex of the child, because little boys are more at risk of being disorganized than little girls. They're more challenging for moms. So you saw there that mentalization is important for inhibiting insensitive behavior. When we unpack insensitive behavior, I think you spoke about the mother's kind of disengagement, the withdrawal. There are various dimensions of insensitive behavior. But this is the part, it's the modulation of aggression that is really where reflective function is very important. This is what it helps the mother to do. Just as we thought it would, but it's just about too good to be true when you actually see it in your data. So the infant's distress triggers the mother's distress, past experience of trauma, helplessness, aggression, and probably also her past experience of disorganization in her own early attachment. So it can be any of those or a combination of that. And, mentalizing overwhelming experience is always difficult. We all know that. Even a nice experience like being in Times Square can be a little bit overwhelming. But mentalizing trauma is extremely difficult. You've spoken about it, but it's a challenge to mentalize. And it leaves adults with childhood trauma with two systems. And in the one system, you can be quite reflective. But when the trauma system is activated, your reflective function drops. And this is what we see when we crudely operationalize that in terms of looking at general reflective function and reflective function about trauma. We see that the reflective function about trauma is very low. And it's that in the traumatized sample predicts infant disorganization, not RF in general. So you've got to know, you've got to follow you've got to identify where the problem is in RF, because what you want is an RF that's robust enough to integrate across domains. You're looking for the weakness in Arik, and that's where your point of action has to be. So what does attachment disorganization feel like? I think Peter gives us the best sense of what it feels like when he talks about the alien self, where the mother reacts to aggression or withdrawal to the infant's distress, and the infant is left alone to try and regulate, but cannot. And this leaves the infant with these unbearable states, and the sense that it is when he needs people the most, when he's at the height of distress, that he will be, that he's least likely to get help, that he's unbearably alone with that state of distress. So what does it look like in clinical practice with a 6-year-old? This is a house that is not inhabited. This is a child with a borderline mother. And all borderline moms are not the same. Some just have very bad affect dysregulation, but they mentalize. Some have BPD, affect dysregulation, low mentalization, and low empathy. And I think this is an example of a child who has a mom like that. So he does a squiggle with the therapist, and the therapist does the yellow mark in this case, and he finishes the drawing, and he says it's a vampire, but one that wasn't one before, and he has soft teeth, so he's not a vampire, real bad vampire, and he has a pick, a sting that can suck blood. So it's a bit like the representation that you showed us. And it goes on. The therapist does just a little yellow circle, and he finishes it, and he says, it's a pram, but it's not any old pram. It's a pram that kills people when you go into it. So here we can see the container, the bad container, that is not a container. And so the therapist carries on with the baby thing and draws a little baby. You can't see it. The child adds tears and the yellow lines. This time is the child, and he says the baby is not well. There are things that hurt him in his pram. So I think this is a representation of the alien self of this 6-year-old that destroys the class, that gets expelled from school, like many of the little boys that we see. So child mentalizing emerges very roughly. The baby learns to think of his behavior as intent, like Peter and Mary beautifully puts it. The baby learns to think of his behavior as intentional communication by the parent treating it as such, long before the baby is actually capable of actually doing communicating intentionally. So then there's marked affect mirroring, pretend, play, family. Children learn from talking about mental states. But, and then there are these profound failures of parental mentalization. But children learn about their minds in the context of loving relationships, where there's a benign and playful interaction with them, and the crystallization of individualized mentalization. So what is the evidence? Child Arik is related, we've shown that child Arik is related to theory of mind and effective understanding, and that play at the age of 4 to 7 predicts later child's effective function when the child is between 8 and 12. and that child RF is related to the way we feel when we look at ourselves in the mirror, and that emotional understanding at 4.5 is associated with less aggression. But this is with a caveat, because emotional understanding is not important if you don't have an aggressive temperament. It doesn't add value. It's not necessary, but it's for the aggressive group where the capacity to name emotions is really important for their aggressive behavior. But when we take a middle class, a low-risk group, the aggressive group actually have better mentalization about aggression than kids who are not aggressive, because there's something that we call potentiated learning. Moms, good moms, teach these kids lots about aggression, so they know more about aggression. And I think this is the way aggression gets folded into the personality and integrated into the personality in the context of normal development. But now the question is, maternal and child RF, is it related to psychopathology? I'm going to skip through this. So what we do with little kids is we ask them, much like I think in the adult, in the parental, in Arietta Slade's measure, we also start now with, can you give me 3 or 5 words to describe yourself? So that dimension of self is captured as well. So with the child attachment interview, there's the self dimension and the other dimension. So we ask the child, give me 3 words to describe yourself, then 3 words to describe your relationship with your mom, your dad, etc. And what happens when your mom gets angry. So 3 words to describe your personality. At age 4, we have only the capacity to describe ourselves in terms of physical characteristics, of blonde hair, blue eyes. And then between the ages of 5, 6, and 7, children tend to describe their likes and dislikes, but it's still very difficult to describe personal characteristics. And they need lots of help when they're dysregulated to start mentalizing again. And so they might say, I like playing with friends, I like dogs, I like to help. But suddenly, at the age of 8 or 9, suddenly emerges by magic, kind of magic, this capacity to say who I am and to understand relationships in mental state. So if you think about it, up through development, you're experiencing yourself. There's this sea of experience, of self-experiences. And as Panksepp says, there's only a tiny part of the self, it's the tip of the iceberg, that's actually conscious about self. So what is happening is that between the age of 8 or 9, the child has grabbed out of the sea of experience things that resemble him or herself. And this capacity, they're also able to understand, they begin to use personality to organize their thinking about others. Now that's very useful, because when your dad gets angry with you on the way to school because you've forgotten your lunchbox, and he loses it completely and shouts at you, you're not upset for the whole day, because you know what his personality is like. You know that he loses his cool, blows off, but then he loves you and helps you a lot. So, a little bit of research. I'm going to cut straight to the chase. When we look at abused and sexually abused and neglect and a control group, we see, look at those means. In my control group, I've got a mean, in my matched control group at ages of 8 to 12, I've got a mean of 3.38. In my abuse group, 2.2. So we are not able to identify basic mental states here. Now, if I go into my abuse group, my extrafamilial abuse group is a little bit higher, but look at my intrafamilial abuse group. So these kids have severe difficulties with identifying mental states. So anything you can do in clinical practice to kick this up is extremely valuable. And what about my maternal RF in this group? Well, the mothers of the sexually abused kids are hardly able to say when the kids are sad or angry. And the mothers of my control group, it's a little bit, it's kind of, I can scrape by maybe with a 3.8. But we can see how important these kinds of interventions are. So what happens when I chuck this all in a model and I test it? Well, we see that child RF. Now, the child it's become self-perpetuating mentalization. I can do it for myself. I'm no longer dependent on mommy or daddy to do it for me. So we see these important relationships with child depression, child-reported depression, and child externalizing. And maternal RF remains important for externalizing. And for sure, abuse also predicts some of the variants. Interesting, if I extend my age group, take out child reflective function, now I'm working with my younger children, it's only maternal RF that predicts internalizing and externalizing. When you put it in a model with abuse, abuse doesn't predict, because you have this this moderation effect, where for the abuse group, maternal RF is a very important protective factor against the development of internalizing symptoms. So, mentalizing is an inner resource. To know what I feel and why, and who I am, protects me when I experience trauma, because I can become dysregulated, but I know who I am. I know I'm not going to, I have other things as well in me. But it's really the challenges, is being able to know what your weaknesses are and being able to use mentalization there, especially if you have extreme temperament, and to get a grip on extreme self-states related to disorganization, trauma, and dissociation. And to get your mentalization back when you're in that automatic mode. This is really the key challenges. So I think in terms of future directions and challenges, we need to improve our work with mothers and children with extreme temperaments. I think there's still a lot of creative things we can do to work. I think we work relatively well with explicit mentalizing, because that's what we do as therapists. But I think we could improve our work with implicit mentalizing, probably through creative computer paradigms, that people practice things and see whether they see the angry face when it really becomes angry, or are seeing an angry face when it's still neutral. That this is, I think, could contribute value for patients. And I think that we need to improve targeting of mentalization of our temperament, trauma, etc. But more than anything else, I'd like to encourage people to use mentalizing interventions with little kids, because I think there's a gap in our provisions, because people will work in a mentalization-based model from, say, they will say, I'm able to work with children from 6 up. But the little ones from 2.5, 3 can benefit from it equally much, but we're not used to working with children that small. So that's in a nutshell what I wanted to share with you through the results of this research program and journey.
Here.